Hello everybody, I'm Kat, and I'm going to be sharing with you some of the books that I've read recently-ish. So normally I try and film these videos every 4 to 6 books I read, but that has not been the case in the past few years, mostly because I either don't have time to film or there are other videos I want to get up sooner, and then these like mini review videos kind of get put on the back burner. But I've decided this year I'm going to start doing quarterly wrap-ups so that way you guys can see them more frequently. I can talk about the books I read more frequently. These are kind of the last books that I read in 2020 from like August, September up until actually I'm going to be including the first 2 books that I read in 2021. So you guys are gonna get probably about like 3 months worth of reading. To be fair, I literally didn't read a book in like the months of October and November. I just stopped reading because school stuff got really stressful. You know, the month of November. College application stuff was like hitting the fan right there. So I had a lot to do and I literally just stopped reading. But luckily in December I picked up a ton of books. So far I'm off to a pretty good start in 2021. I mean, I only have 2 books read so far, but you know what, whatever, it's fine. As always, these mini book reviews are spoiler free, so you can watch these and not have to worry about being spoiled. The first book I'm going to be talking about today is Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. If you already watched my 2020 disappointments video, I've already talked a little bit about this. So reading this book, the only thing I can truly compare this reading experience to is the smell of mildew. Being in Edward's head is musty, the audiobook narrator just sounded musty, and my now musty soul is in a dire need of a cleansing after Edward Cullen crapped all over it. I was a fan of the books in middle school, as I'm sure most of you guys were, and at the time I did not recognize the significant problems in this series. Now I do. There are some huge problems in this entire series. I never regretted reading those books in middle school. However, I do regret reading this book. This book tried to redeem Edward's creepy qualities, but instead it ended up making him seem more of a creep, if that makes any sense. Being in Edward's head this whole time was just so difficult. His constant inner monologue, which is constant, was so annoying and repetitive. Like, dude, we get it. The constant self-hatred I had to read over and over and over again honestly made me really dislike Eddie, and I was Team Edward. The best part of this book is definitely Rosalie and Emmett. I have a newfound appreciation for both of those characters after reading this book, and in some ways this book did bring back nostalgic memories. I did in fact read this book the one day I went to school this year in person, and it definitely took me back to middle school where I would read the Twilight Saga alone at lunch. So I was glad to have that full circle moment where it was like, hey, I'm reading Midnight Sun alone at lunch just like I read Twilight. Reading this book made me question the characters I once loved and also question the world I once used as an escape. I personally would not recommend this book unless you're super curious into knowing what Edward was thinking throughout the entirety of Twilight, which pretty early on you're going to realize that you really didn't need to know his entire thought process during this story. But I will say that Edward Cullen is truly the king of pandemics, and it's no wonder that Midnight Sun came out in 2020. I ended up giving Midnight Sun 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman. If you guys watched my 2020 favorites video, you already know how I feel about this whole comic series. This is literal perfection. I love this volume. I love all of the volumes. Each volume just gets better and better. This particular volume follows 2 boys named Nick and Charlie. Charlie is an openly gay teen. He and Nick end up having like a few classes together, and Charlie ends up gaining feelings for him. And Nick also realizes that he has some feelings for Charlie. He kind of ends up questioning his own sexuality because he's never felt that way towards boys before. This is just the most adorable thing I've ever read. Like, I'm not even kidding. The art style is adorable, the story is adorable. This volume, it's such a great start to the series, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I ended up reading was Roomies by Christina Lauren. So this book follows our main character, and I honestly forget her name. She is the niece of this big like Broadway producer slash writer, and he has created like the biggest musical on Broadway currently. They suddenly have an opening for a guitarist in their orchestra, and so our main character has been following this one guitarist who plays at this one train station stop because she thinks he's adorable, and he's from Ireland. And so she approaches him one day and tells him about this opportunity and wants to know if he's interested. And while he's honored, he is technically not a citizen of the United States, and so in order to get him citizenship, the two of them decide to get married even though they know nothing about each other. Honestly, the only reason I picked this up was because my other 2 Heartstopper volumes were in the mail, and I needed something to read during that week where my Heartstopper volumes were being mailed to me. I knew I didn't didn't want to jump into a fantasy novel because I had just finished Midnight Sun and that had literally briefly ruined my reading life for a little bit. So this book was kind of meh. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything I particularly loved. The characters didn't stand out to me and the romance was alright. But with that being said, the premise of it was really cute. The one thing Christina Lauren does really well is like show what a healthy relationship should look like. I wish that they would write more YA because this is the kind of stuff that young readers need to see, because currently young readers are being fed books like After. That is not a healthy relationship at all. They need really good examples of healthy relationships, and those are so hard to come by in YA novels, and I just wish that they would write more YA books. I know they have one. They should write more. Personally, I have other Christina Lauren novels I would recommend over this one, but if you're in the need for like a quick palate cleanser read, then by all means, it's pretty good. I don't really have any complaints about it, but there's nothing that particularly stood out to me about it. So then next, I read volumes 2 and 3 of Heartstopper. Trigger warning for eating disorders and mentions of self-harm in volume 3. Volume 2, no trigger warning. Again, these are just adorable follow-ups. Each volume in this series gets better and better, as I mentioned earlier. I love this series. I'm so excited for volume 4. So the next book I read is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I actually read this book for my Myths and Monsters class that I kind of talked about in my book haul. But this year in school, because I already earned all of my English credits, I was lucky enough to take an elective English course. Last semester, it was this class called Myths and Monsters, and then this semester, it's a class called Sci-Fi, where we read mainly sci-fi literature. In Myths and Monsters, we read fantasy, we read myths, all that fun stuff. So I read A Wizard of Earthsea for this class. This book follows this young wizard named Ged, who doesn't know he's a wizard, but then discovers he's a wizard. And then he ends up going to like a wizarding school. At his wizarding school, Ged accidentally unleashes this dark shadow that's like full of dark magic, and it's up to Ged to go out around the world and find this shadow and ultimately make it cease to exist. I ended up giving this, I think, 3 stars. I gave a lot of books 3 stars at the end of 2020, which I'm just realizing now. This is very similar to Roomies, where there wasn't anything in particular that stood out to me, but there wasn't anything in this that I thought was particularly bad. It was just kind of like, okay, all right, we're vibing. That's kind of how I feel about it. Next, I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a gothic classic novel that follows this man named Frankenstein who decides to take it upon himself to construct an inanimate body and bring it to life. So this is another one that I read for the Myths and Monsters class, because if you did not know, Frankenstein's alternate title is The Modern Prometheus, as in Prometheus the Titan. Oh my god. I ended up reading this for school for that Myths and Monsters class, and I was actually really surprised at how much I enjoyed it. I'm beginning to realize that I really love gothic classic literature. Like, I really love Edgar Allan Poe stuff. I really love this book. So after I read Frankenstein, I took like a 2-month break from reading because my life got busy. But during this 2-month break, I was kind of on again and off again reading After We Collided by Hannah Todd. And while I was on again, off again reading it, I was also vlogging the whole time. So even though I did take a break from YouTube during those months, I was still filming stuff. And so if you want to see the process of me reading After We Collided and talking about it in much greater detail, go check out my I read After We Collided so you don't have to video. But long story short, this is the sequel to After. It picks up right where After leaves off. You get the same old, same old. Much like After was a constant repetitive cycle of Tessa and Hardin together and Tessa and Hardin broken up, this followed the same formula. It did try and change a little bit up, but it didn't really work. I didn't intend on picking this up, but I was really bored and I got the date for the movie release wrong. The movie came out later than I thought it did. I decided to pick this up and read it before I saw the movie. I've only seen like the first 40 minutes of the movie, and already they're trying to make Hardin look like the bad boy with the heart of gold when really he's just so toxic and harmful to Tessa, and that's proven in this book. This book definitely a trigger warning for sexual assault, for violence. I did not rate this book because I knew going into it I wasn't gonna like it, so there is no rating attached to it for me. Reading this was honestly a waste of time. I hope that no one out there picks this up just to hate read it. Just go watch the movie. You'll waste less time and you'll get kind of the same thing out of it. Okay, so the next book I read was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the 3rd and final book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. It was a pretty good conclusion. I do have some mixed feelings though about the events that kind of went on in it, because there are certain things that it's like, huh, that was kind of weird. There were two parts in this novel that really bugged me. The biggest conflict in this book wasn't really introduced until about halfway through, and the way that conflict was resolved felt a little bit too rushed for me. We're just gonna wrap it up and throw a bow on top. Okay. I see you, Miss Holly. I see you. The other thing I didn't like was the subplot with Vivi and Heather's relationship. It's not even really a plot, but it was brought up so much that it might as well have been. And I didn't really like how it was handled. It was kind of toxic and I didn't really like it. With that being said, I did overall really enjoy my time with it. I mainly listened to this on audio and I love the audiobooks for this series. The narrator has such a soothing voice that low-key sounds like Kristen Bell at some points, and I love Miss Kristen Bell. So I would 10 out of 10 recommend the audiobooks. I'm gonna miss Jude and Carden a lot. I feel like I spent most of 2020 with them because I read The Cruel Prince in January and then The Wicked King in July and then The Queen of Nothing in December. I feel like I've spent most of 2020 in their world, but this is such a fun series and I'm really glad that I decided to literally pick it up on a whim at this time last year. I'm so grateful I have this series in my life. The next book I have here is I Would Leave Me If I Could by Halsey. This is her collection of poems. So I ended up giving this poetry collection 4.5 stars, and the only thing that kept me from giving it a full 5 is the fact that I wanted more. I wanted so much more. I was so riveted throughout this poetry book and I absolutely loved every second of it. I even tabbed some of the poems because I loved some of the poems in this collection. They were all so good. Next I have Water Runs Red by Jenna Claire. Jenna Claire is another fellow booktuber here in this community, and this is her debut poetry book. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was a solid debut poetry book. The only issue I really had with it was it did remind me of Amanda Lovelace's poetry. Amanda Lovelace's poetry is kind of hit or miss for me. I know I've put some of her poetry collections on like my disappointments of the year, but I've also put her poetry collections on like my honorable mentions of the year. So it just kind of depends. But as a debut poetry book, I definitely thought it was good, and I'm looking forward to see how Jenna improves as a poet and as an author, because I know that she's also working on a novel right now. The next like book slash comic I have here is 6, which is one of the Stranger Things comics, and I did not like this one. Unpopular opinion, but I actually preferred The Other Side, which it was the first volume, more than this one, which is the opposite if you look at the Goodreads reviews. I was really looking forward to reading this because I am a huge fan of Stranger Things, and I was really looking forward to this because this explores like some of the other children that were kept in Hawkins' lab that have powers, and so I was really looking forward to it. But this ended up being like Hawkins' lab, high school. There was like a weird romance between 6 and 3. They weren't punished for it, which was so bizarre because Hawkins' lab is such a horrible environment for any child to live in, as we know from the show. And so seeing this friendly version of Hawkins' lab was so bizarre, and I really didn't like it. It felt so out of character, so out of the show. It was really like reading a really bad fan fiction. That's the only way I can use to describe it. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I was really disappointed in this because I was really looking forward to getting more of an origin story to some of the other children that live there, but that is not what I got out of this. The next 2 books I have here are the Sailor Moon short stories, volume 1 and 2. I gave both of these 3 stars. These were just fun little short stories, and it put me back in the world of Sailor Moon, but just like to dip my toes in and be reminded of how fun it is. Next, I have The Great Gatsby graphic novel. I gave this one 4 stars. I really liked the artwork in it, and it was such a fun way to revisit this story. I would definitely recommend this, like if you're a fan of The Great Gatsby. So next, I read Guts by Raina Telgemeier, and I've never really talked about this before on my channel. Raina Telgemeier was one of my favorite authors when I was younger. I remember constantly rereading Smile. I think I've read Smile at least like 5 to 10 times. I reread Drama quite a few times as well, but I haven't reread Sisters or Ghosts. I really liked both of them. So this is another like addition slash companion graphic novel to like the Smile graphic novel series. So it does again follow Raina as our main character. It was a really cute story with a really good message, and I really loved Raina's books when I was younger, so it was really nice like being able to return to the same characters that I already knew but in a completely different story. I will say though that the target audience was definitely aimed for people younger than me, so it was a little bit less enjoyable because there were certain points that were made over and over and over again. Now that I'm older, the point can be made once and I'm like, got it. But it was definitely made for younger readers in that sense where there are certain points that are repeated. This book would make me realize like I wasn't so alone, because when when I was younger, I was definitely really anxious and really shy. I wish I had this book when I was younger because it would let me know it's okay, you're not alone, you're not the only one who feels this way. But reading it when I was older, it got a little bit repetitive, rehashing those points over and over again. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was definitely really cute, a really sweet novel. If you have younger readers in your household, Raina Telgemeier's stuff is absolutely perfect. You can see like some of the artwork. It's really well done, really easy to read, and all of her books send really good messages. Next, I have here Laura Dean is Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. I will say, trigger warning for abortion and abusive relationships. I ended up giving this like 3.5 stars, and if you watched my 2020 disappointments, you'll already know that I talked about it a little bit there. But this story I just felt like was missing something. This book follows our main character named Freddie. Throughout the whole like duration of this graphic novel, she is writing to like a newspaper columnist that gives relationship advice, and that's kind of the plot. She's writing to this newspaper columnist about her toxic relationship with Laura Dean. I wanted more from it. I wanted some subplot. I just wanted more. That main plotline didn't have enough tension for me to want to keep reading. What did make me want to keep reading was the fact it was a graphic novel, and I also wanted to meet my Goodreads goal. We're moving on to the 2 books I read in 2021. I'm glad I wrapped up all these books because now I feel like I can start clean with 2021. So let's get into that. So the first book I read in 2021 is none other than Solitaire by Alice Oseman. So Solitaire follows our main character Tori Spring, and her younger brother Charlie has just come back from recovering from an eating disorder and self-harm, and so her and her family are trying to adjust to their new life with Charlie back at home and in recovery. In the meantime, at her school, there is this group called Solitaire that keeps pulling pranks around the school. Tori seems to feel connected to Solitaire, but she doesn't know why, and Tori and her newfound friend Michael Holden decide to investigate Solitaire a little bit more and see what exactly they're up to. I will say trigger warning for eating disorders, self-harm, because there are mentions of that when Tori talks about her brother Charlie, and then also trigger warning for some suicidal thoughts. I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. This is honestly one of the best books I've read in a long time. I haven't read a YA contemporary that has been this captivating and brilliant in so long. I was already quite familiar with some of the characters because I'd read the Heartstopper comics a few months earlier. It was so nice being able to recognize some of the characters when they popped up. Being inside Tori's head honestly reminded me a lot of being inside Holden Caulfield's head from Catcher in the Rye, except Tori was way less problematic and even funnier, especially at the beginning of the novel. And I saw a lot of myself in Michael Holden. I just love that boy. That character is just so good. He's so well written and I love him. What Alice Oseman does really well is side characters, and that's something I really got to appreciate in Solitaire. Seeing how even the side characters were so well developed and so layered with all these different personality traits and these different character traits and all this stuff was just so brilliant. It was so well done. So the last book I have for this wrap up today is also the last book that I literally finished a week ago-ish, a little less than a week ago, and that is Always and Forever Lara Jean by Jenny Han. This is the 3rd and final book in the To All the Boys I've Loved Before series. I was kind of disappointed in this one. So this 3rd book follows Lara Jean and Peter Kay during their senior year as college decisions come in, and the 2 of them have crafted a plan for college and how they are going to handle it and how they're going to stay together, be together, they're going to go to the same college, they have it all mapped out. And then the college decisions come in and things don't go quite as planned, and it throws off Peter and Lara Jean's plans for college. I ended up giving this like 3.5 stars. It's probably closer to 3. Kind of depends on my mood. Like some days I'm like, oh, it was kind of cute, but then other days I just kind of like don't like it. So after hearing several mixed reviews about it, I can finally say I was kind of disappointed in it. The biggest reason I'm disappointed in it is due to the toxic relationship between Peter and Lara Jean, because once their college plans derail, they become super toxic to each other and they're constantly trying to manipulate each other into getting what each individual person wants, and it was really kind of toxic. Reading it as a senior, going through some of the same things, because Lara Jean was only a few months down the road from where I am currently. She was like in March, April receiving her decisions. I'm here in January. I submitted my applications earlier this month. So knowing that she's only a few months down the road put in perspective how immature her character was, because some of the stuff that she would do and like say, I don't know a single high school senior who would do this. you know? This book is such a senior year novel, and I will say it was a lot of fun reading about the different activities that the students get to do as a part of their senior year traditions at their school, because as a senior in this climate, I'm missing out, low-key. Am I bitter? Not really. I'm not really a social person. There are kids at my school, though, that have taken upon themselves to throw super spreader events because they're bitter about it. And I'm really quite embarrassed over the way my school administration has handled that. But anyway, let's not get into that. I will say, though, that it did almost go a little bit too far in discussing the anxiety over college admissions. And I will say that I did check my college portals a little too often while reading this book. Part of me is really sad to give this book less than 4 stars. I really could not stand Peter and Lara Jean in it. I also found the ending to be really disappointing too. I was really hoping that it would go in a different direction than it did, but it didn't, so here we are. It was a better ending and more closed off ending than P.S. I Still Love You, which definitely had a more open ending, but in a lot of ways reading this book felt like I was reading the rewrite of P.S. I Still Love You, because there are a lot of recycled plot lines from P.S. I Still Love You that reappear in this book, and I really did not need that. And also some of those plot lines didn't even get an ending to them. Why recycle it if you're not going to end it in a different way? You know what I mean? It would have been nice to have a slightly different ending to this book. Alright, and that is it for this quarterly wrap-up. I definitely talked way too long in this. I hope that my video is not too long. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I post videos on Thursdays-ish, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!